Serafina and the Black Cloak, Chapter 15. Serafina watched the doorknob rotate a quarter turn and then come to a stop with a click of metal on metal. She had locked the door when she came in, and she remembered the weight of it, with its solid, inch-thick oak panels. It seemed nearly impossible for anyone to break the door. She just hoped that the man in the black cloak couldn't pass through it using some sort of dark magic. She could feel him breathing on the other side of the door, seething. She waited, holding on to Gideon. After several seconds, the doorknob returned to its normal position, and the footsteps resumed. Continuing slowly down the hallway, she let go of Gideon, and they all finally started breathing normally again. She looked at Braden. "That was a close one," she whispered. "I'm glad you got here before he did," Braden said. She went over and climbed back onto the bed. They lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house, expecting running footsteps or a cry of terror in the night. But all they heard was the crackle of the fire and their own steady breathing as they drifted in and out of sleep. Serafina woke the next morning to the sound of Braden's aunt knocking urgently on the locked bedroom door. "Braden, it's time to get up," Miss Vanderbilt said. "Braden." Serafina slipped off the bed and looked for a place to hide. "Here," Braden whispered as he pulled back a decorative brass vent cover on the wall beneath his desk. "Braden, are you all right in there?" his aunt asked through the door. "Please open up, darling. You're worrying me." Serafina crawled into the air passage. Braden replaced the cover behind her. She watched him through the grill as he shoved the dress under his bed, then glanced around the room to make sure there wasn't any other evidence that she'd been there. Gideon studied his master with interest, the dog's pointed ears raised upward, his head tilted to the side in inquiry. "You don't say a word," Braden warned him, and Gideon lowered his ears. Finally, Braden walked over to the door and opened it. "I'm here. I'm all right." His aunt swept into the room, wrapped her arms around him, and held him. That's when Serafina realized that Mrs. Vanderbilt really did love Braden. She could see it just in the way she clutched him. "What's happened?" Braden asked his aunt uncertainly. "The pastor's son disappeared during the night." When she heard the news of another victim, Serafina felt a terrible knot in her stomach. That made 3 children in 3 nights now. It was like something was driving the attacker anew, pushing him harder and harder. She'd been so relieved that she and Braden had been able to escape the man in the black cloak by hiding in Braden's locked room. But now she realized all that meant was that he got someone else. Another child was gone. She had eluded the demon, but she had not stopped him. Knowing that she had to find some way out other than through Braden's room, she crawled down the passage to see where it would lead. She came to an intersection of 2 other passages. She took the one on the right, where she came to another split. There appeared to be a whole network of secret passages running through the house. So this is where the rats have been hiding all these years. She crawled past vents that led into the various private rooms of the house, sitting rooms, hallways, bedrooms, even bathrooms. She saw maids making beds, guests getting dressed for the day. Everyone was whispering in worry and confusion. No one understood what was happening. They were talking about shades and murderers. Biltmore had become a haunted place where children disappeared. She saw the footman, Mr. Pratt, walking hurriedly down a corridor with Miss Whitney. No, Miss Whitney, this is no normal killer," Mr. Pratt was saying as they went by. "That's an awful thing to say," Miss Whitney protested. "How do you know they're dead?" "Oh, they're dead. Believe me, this is a creature of the night. Something straight from hell." The phrase shocked Serafina. "Creature of the night," he'd said. But she was a creature of the night. She'd used the phrase herself. Were creatures of the night evil? Did that mean she was evil? It horrified her to think that she was in some way associated with or like the man in the black cloak. "Well, what are we going to do about it? That's what I want to know," a man shouted. She crawled a few feet through the passage in the direction of the man's voice and looked down through a metal grate into the gun room. From her vantage point, she could see a dozen gentlemen standing and talking about what was going on. There was nothing we can do, Mr. Vanderbilt said. We have to let the detectives do their job. Mr. Vanderbilt knew all the ins and outs of Biltmore better than anybody. He designed the place. Why all the hidden staircases and secret doors? And he was rich, so he had the money and the power to do whatever he wanted. And he was a Vanderbilt, so no one would ever suspect him. Was this why he built a mansion in the middle of a dark forest? So now here Mr. Vanderbilt was, telling everyone that there was nothing they could do but wait for the detectives to do their work. He was undoubtedly the person paying the private detectives, so they'd come up with whatever answer he wanted them to. The other gentlemen shook their heads in frustration. Perhaps we could bring in one of the well-known detectives agencies from New York, Mr. Bendel suggested. These local chaps are asking everybody a lot of prying questions, but they don't seem to be getting the job done. Or perhaps we should organize another search party, Mr. Thorne suggested. I agree, Mr. Brahms said. The detectives seem to think that one of the servants is taking the children, but I don't think we should rule out that it could be anyone in the house, even one of us. Maybe it's you, Brahms, Mr. Bendel snarled, clearly not appreciating his implication. Don't be ridiculous, Mr. Vanderbilt said, getting between them. It's not one of us. Just calm down. The women folk are terrified, said a gentleman she didn't recognize. Every night another child disappears. We've got to do something. Do we even know if the attacker is an outsider or someone inside Biltmore? Someone else asked. Maybe it's a total stranger or one of our own men, Mr. Bozeman or Mr. Crankshot. We don't even know if there is an attacker, Mr. Bendel said. We haven't found any proof that these are kidnappings. For all we know, these children just ran away. Of course there's an attacker, Mr. Brahms argued, becoming more and more upset. Someone's taking our children. My Clara would never run away. Mr. Thorne is right. We need to organize another search. Mr. Rosanov said something in a mix of Russian and English, but no one seemed to pay him any mind. Perhaps the children are falling into some kind of hole in the basement or something, Mr. Bendel suggested. There aren't any holes in the basement, Mr. Vanderbilt said firmly, offended by the suggestion that Biltmore itself might be a dangerous place. Or maybe there's an uncovered well somewhere on the grounds, Mr. Bendel pressed on. The main thing is that we need to protect the remaining children, Mr. Thorne said. I'm especially concerned for the young master. What can we do to make sure he's safe? Don't worry, Mr. Vanderbilt said. We'll keep Braden safe. That's all well and good, but we have to organize another search party, Mr. Brahms said again. I have to find my Clara. I'm sorry, Mr. Brahms, but I just don't think that's going to do any good, Mr. Vanderbilt said. We've searched the house and grounds several times already. There's got to be something else we can do, something more effective. There has to be an answer to this terrible puzzle. Mr. Rosanov turned to Mr. Thorne, touched his arm for assistance. Nikotori ubiyat ditiya, he said to him. Otis porkada my organizium novyu poisk batya, Mr. Thorne said in reply. Serafina remembered that Mr. Bendel had mentioned that Mr. Thorne spoke Russian, but it still surprised her to hear it. Mr. Thorne went on to translate what was going on for Mr. Rosanov and tried to reassure him. She thought it was kind of Mr. Thorne to help Mr. Rosanov, but suddenly Mr. Rosanov became very upset and looked at Mr. Thorne in extreme confusion. Otets? He asked him. Batya? Mr. Thorne blanched as if he'd realized that he'd made a dreadful mistake in his Russian. He tried to apologize, but as he did so, Mr. Rosanov became even more upset. Everything Mr. Thorne said to him made him more and more agitated. Serafina watched all of this in fascination. What had Mr. Thorne said to Mr. Rosanov that caused him such anguish? Gentlemen, please, Mr. Vanderbilt said, frustrated with the arguing. All right, we'll do it. If that's what you think should be done, then we'll organize another search effort. But this time, we'll search slowly, systematically, from one room to the next, and we'll post guard positions in each room that we've completed. The other men heartily agreed with Mr. Vanderbilt's plan. They were clearly relieved that some sort of agreement had been reached and there was something they could do. The feeling of uselessness was unbearable. It was a feeling Serafina had in common with them. The men streamed out of the room to organize the search, all but poor Mr. Rostanov, who remained behind, red-faced and upset. She frowned. Something wasn't right.